Howdy, Marijuana Nation. It's Monday. Let's see, what is it? It's May 11th, 2020. That's how connected I am to everything today. It's Monday, and in case you forgot or you didn't listen to last Monday's show, we're doing a new thing here on Monday where I'm not going to be producing a new show on Mondays, at least I think through the summer. And what we're going to do is we're going to publish episodes of some of the other podcasts that we produce, because right now I produce a total of 5 shows. So, was it 4 industry? Maybe is it 6? All right, so let me count. So we got Marijuana Today Daily, the show you're listening to now. We got Marijuana Today. We got Weed Wonks. We got The Green Rush, and we have Eat Well, Travel Often. Yeah, so that's five podcasts in all. Eat Well, Travel Often is the non-cannabis podcast that I produce for Melissa Goldberg, who is married to Louis Goldberg, who is the host of the Green Rush podcast. So they are a couple that podcasts. Let me enunciate that better. And both those shows are great. I'm obviously very biased in that because I make them, but I think all the shows that we make are great. So what we're doing here on Mondays is we're just going to be publishing episodes of other shows, so you listen to them, and hopefully you head over to their website, or you find them on whatever app you listen to podcasts with, and you listen to them as well. Because really, if you tune into every show so I'm just talking about the marijuana industry specific shows, because that's what I'm guessing you're specifically interested in. Eat Well, Travel Often is food and travel, and it's a great show. But for this pitch that I'm going to talk about right now, we're just going to focus on Marijuana Today Daily, Weed Wonks, and Green Rush. If you listen to all 4 of those shows, it would take about 4 hours of time, because Weed Wonks, Green Rush, and Marijuana Today each are about an hour, and Marijuana Today Daily is about 10 minutes, but there's I guess there's only 4 episodes now, news per week, so that's only 40 minutes. So 3 hours and 40 minutes. If you give me 3 hours and 40 minutes every week, and if you listen to all of the podcasts, the marijuana industry podcasts that I produce, you are absolutely going to be on top of what's going on in the industry. You're going to be better informed about how the industry was built and how we got here, which is definitely important in any industry, to know the history of the people and just where we came from. If there's any industry you need to do that in, it is our industry. So especially if you're new to cannabis, I mean, you can't blunder into legal cannabis without knowing, just the history of it, because it's really important. Trust me there. So if you listen to my podcasts, you're going to know that. You're going to be informed on the news, because Marijuana Today Daily, even for 4 shows a week, that's 40 news shows that I jump into, then I tell you the things that you should know. And I'm pretty decent in some things, but news curation is something that I think I'm very good at, because I make a living doing it. So those 40 news bits are the 40 news stories that you should listen to. So my long-winded pitch is that you should listen to the other shows that I make. It's Green Rush, podcast.net, weedwonks.com, MJ Today podcast.com, and obviously, while you're listening to this, so I don't really need to tell you, but it's MJ Today Daily for this podcast. So you can just search whatever app you listen to your podcasts in, search for Green Rush, Weed Wonks, and Marijuana Today, and you'll find those shows. And then also you should listen to Eat Well, Travel Often, because it's also a great podcast just about food and travel. And because good food is good, and someday we will get to travel again, hopefully. So this week we're running an episode of the Weed Wonks. In this episode, Jordan Wellington, who hosts the Weed Wonks along with Andrew Livingston. Andrew actually wasn't on this episode, so it's just Jordan here. He is speaking with Jill Ellsworth, who is a cannabis remediation and testing expert. So what she does, it's a really interesting episode, because if you're a cannabis grower and you have a batch of cannabis that tests, you have too much mold, or you have too much contamination, or some kind of contaminant in your marijuana that makes you test over Jill and her company Willow Industries, they can tell you how to basically save it, to do different things to it, so that you can have a clean product that can be safely deployed to customers without having to just run it through extraction, which can often just reduce the amount of money that you get per unit of cannabis. So if your business world would be improved at all by having a better understanding of the science and technology of remediation in the world of legal cannabis, then I encourage you to keep listening. Even if you don't, I still encourage you to listen, because Jordan is a fantastic podcaster, and he always has great discussions. Really cool news. Next week, we're going to be running an episode of The Green Rush, and I know what episode we're running because we recorded it last week. It is an awesome interview with the filmmaker Kevin Smith, who I've been a fan of Kevin Smith since the late 90s when I was in high school and I watched Clerks. It's this just the awesome black and white indie movie that he made with no budgets, and back in the day I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I actually thought about it, and I realized that Kevin Smith was definitely one of the first people to get me to start thinking about, I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was younger, and it just kind of morphed into me being a podcaster via a long and convoluted route. But Kevin Smith is, he literally jumped into the interview and was just on. He was just really just engaging and smart and funny and personable and human. And it was probably the best interview I've ever done. I'm excited to share that next Monday. So you can and should listen to it first on The Green Rush. It's going to be at greenrushpodcast.net. But if you don't catch it there, you should. But if you don't catch it, we're going to put it here on the show here on Monday. So I'll be back with a news podcast, a news episode tomorrow. As always, we're now running with news episodes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then here on Monday, again, we're running episodes of our other shows. So without further ado, that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to stop talking. We're going to listen to Jordan speak with cannabis remediation and testing expert Jill Ellsworth from Willow Industries. You should listen to Weed Wonks over at weedwonks.com, and I will catch you with news tomorrow.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Weed Wonks, the podcast that dives deep into the nerdy details, the minutia, the ever-fun silliness that is cannabis regulatory policy. And we do it all to help our fellow policy wonks, policymakers, regulators, business members, advocates, and the Canna Curious stay more informed about the changing landscape of cannabis laws and regulations. Please remember to rate, subscribe, and review. I'm your host, Jordan Wellington, VP of Policy at VS Strategies. And with us in spirit is my policy partner in crime, Andrew Livingston, Director of Economics and Research. Sadly, he can't be on the pod today as he is cranking away at the home bunker. But we do have an amazing guest with us today, someone I have had the pleasure of knowing for a long time. Jill Ellsworth, CEO and founder of Willow Industries. So I get to do a little bit of the bio intro for Jill. I'm going to talk as I do, unlike Andrew, mostly about how we met and how I got to meet Jill over the years. Andrew was laughing a few days ago that my intros are much more about how I met the person and who they know, and his are a little different. But Jill, I remember it had to be 2015, I think. I got a call from Josh Capel at one of the founding partners over at Vicente Cederberg. And he said, I just connected with this woman named Jill, and she wants to run a cannabis decontamination company. And I don't know what that really is, but it sounds wonky and weird and kind of interesting and science and tech based. And I just figured this seems right up your alley and you would get a kick out of it. And I was like, yes. I was like, this is fascinating. I had, left the MED about a year beforehand, maybe not even at that point. Yeah, it was probably about a year beforehand, had done a lot of work on their testing program. And so I kind of got kicked anything that was science and tech and software and all kinds of other things based because of some of the other projects I had been working on. And so I first connected with Jill and we spoke over the phone, and then we met in person. But like the indelible memory that I will never forget, that I will share with anybody till the end of time, is the evolution of how Willow came to be a cannabis decontamination company that uses ozone technology, which we're going to talk a bit about, and what clean cannabis means and things like that. But we didn't start with ozone. The one that I always love talking about is how we started with something that's called HPP, or high pressure pasteurization. So we all know about how milk is pasteurized, and that's typically done through heat pasteurization. Well, this is HPP, high pressure pasteurization. And so my first like burned in my memory experience with Jill was when she tried to use HPP on cannabis flower and showed up at the office with weed cocaine. It literally turned the raw cannabis flower into a powder, and showed up with, I guess, and theoretically snortable cannabis, which was maybe it was clearly not our intention of a new product line. And we were like, all right, back to the drawing board. Like we knew that there was a purpose and a vision here. We just need to find the right methodology. And so, I just, that is Jill, I love having you on the pod. I love sharing that story, and I've told it God knows how many times, because it is it was this like bright green dust in a baggie that you showed up at the office with, and you're like, I don't think this is going to work. What do you think? And I'm like, no, it's not going to work. So, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Weed Wonks. We are so excited to have you. Could you maybe just start by giving us a little bit of your background and about Willow and how you got started in the cannabis space?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. Been wanting to be on this for a long time, so excited. I mean, you telling that story just brings back a litany of memories of that time, and one, how I was so devastated that HPP didn't work. I was sitting in the Miami airport crying because I was like, oh my gosh, this idea I had that I thought was like so revolutionary was like dead in the water. And so, but alas, things have changed. So anyway, I am a registered dietitian. I have a master's in food science, and I come from the food and beverage industry. I owned a cold pressed juice company. I owned a beverage distribution business, and, started looking at cannabis about 4.5 years ago, and understanding that a lot of the regulations and the requirements I was so used to in food and beverage actually were not happening in cannabis at that time. So before I went down the HPP road with cannabis, I really came up with the idea of like, I want to find a way to clean weed. That was when Colorado first implemented their mandatory testing, and there was no solution for cultivators if there were microbials present on the flower. So wanted to find a way to clean weed, started with HPP, obviously disastrous.
But like literally the funniest business disaster, I think, in my professional career. So, it didn't work out, but it provided us with years and years of an awesome story to share.
That is very true. But it also still motivated me to find a solution. And so when that didn't work, I sat at home and I tried to figure out, okay, what actually would make sense for this? At the time, I was getting involved with ozone gas because my father-in-law is a naturopathic doctor and uses ozone gas in his practice. So I started learning about ozone and finding that it was historically used in the agricultural industry, but also used in food and beverage. So we pivoted and found that ozone was really an effective method for killing microbials on cannabis flower. And this was finished, fully harvested flower. And so, we kind of took off from there.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what we want to talk a lot today about is this idea of clean cannabis. But I think it's important to start with the framing that, this has really been the mission of Willow Industries, a company that, in full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board of and have worked with since before it was ever a company, because when Jill and I first met, it was like, hey, I want to make sure everyone's cannabis is clean. And I was like, well, that's an awesome idea. And we had plenty of clients that were struggling with the testing program and knew that, this was all an evolution of process and us figuring out how to make sure that we could put safe, clean products on the market, nobody had ever really thought about product safety in cannabis in the illicit market. And we were starting from scratch. And so, this idea and this mission of how do we, provide cultivators with the tools that are common in other industries to help make sure their products get to market. People typically, I know that there's a little bit, there's been some seepage in it, but like pretty much every milk, every drop of milk that you've drank in your entire life has been pasteurized. And that goes for the vast majority of food products and consumer goods. There is some kind of step along the way that they use to treat the product to make sure that it's not contaminated. And there just wasn't that reality in cannabis. And so, it was kind of an interesting project to get off the ground and be like, okay, how are we going to do this? And we learned a lot of lessons along the way about how, high pressure pasteurization powderizes cannabis, which doesn't really help us all that much from getting a shelf saleable product, to landing on ozone and identifying a technology that, showed tremendous efficacy in addressing and remediating and decontaminating cannabis products. So I think, but we want to start out at the outset, right? So cannabis is unlike other consumer commodities in that our product safety program is a outcome-based testing program. Very few states engage in really heavy process oversight and examine the processes of a cultivator bringing a flower to market. And instead, what we do is we subject harvest batches to government-mandated third-party testing programs that require specific amounts of cannabis be removed from a harvest batch and tested for specific contaminants at intervals. That is not how things worked in your juicing business.
Right. I mean, with standard food and beverage, especially beverages, where a lot of my experience lies, what you would do is put together a validation study. And the validation study would show that you have implemented a kill step. And then after a 30-day shelf-stable study, then you determine, was there any pathogenic growth afterwards? If not, then your kill step worked. And then I never had to do any other testing besides that. So there wasn't, a test for every juice that hit the store shelf, which is, why food and beverage was so different from the impetus of this company to where cannabis is, where you're testing every batch.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's a lot of people that really understand product safety regulations and how the product safety system that starts with the FDA and weaves its way all the way down through state public health departments as well as local public health departments operates. It is a process oversight driven situation. They review your standard operating procedures. There is some testing and validation and ongoing measurements to make sure the product that you're meeting those processes. But it is typically a lot of in-house testing, some third-party testing. It typically involves an examination of your processes, a review of things. It is not every harvest batch that you produce will be sampled in this manner and 3 grams shipped off to a third party to be tested for this battery of contaminants. That is just simply not how things are done. And so, we're dealing with a completely separate framing in cannabis. And this stems really largely from the history in Colorado when it was first started, and in Washington there was testing programs that became mandatory, and that's because there is no FDA, right? All of the oversight and process oversight for other consumable products starts with the FDA. Well, the FDA is not here. And the state and local public health departments don't have the institutional knowledge to do the process oversight that the FDA would. And so there was no way for them to bridge this product safety gap outside of kind of a binary test, right? This binary test is essentially substituting for the institutional knowledge that the FDA has.
Exactly. Well, and one thing to add is that we were really regulated by the public health departments. We had to have HACCP plans. We had to have kill steps in place. I mean, there was oversight, but it's definitely different than the oversight that we're seeing in cannabis, because we were federally regulated, and all of the different GMP protocols that we had to have in place were mandated by, different regulatory agencies. But I mean, clearly very different than what we're seeing in cannabis right now.
Yeah, and the knowledge for, what you'll see is that the state and local public health departments are ensuring compliance with those standards. But if the standard is good or not, that's really something that's determined at the FDA level, right? That the institutional expertise in that level of what is necessary for CGMP is really not as much housed in local public health departments. And at the same time, we need to also recognize that local public health departments are not regulating the cannabis industry. This was a massive controversy that I got in a lot of trouble with when I was with the state, where I kept being like, well, why doesn't the public health department regulate cannabis? And was told 100 nonsense reasons why they weren't, and got in a lot of trouble and got lectured by my bosses to stop causing trouble with our sister agency. And I was like, well, I just want them to do their job. And they were like, well, you just need to shut up. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not the boss. They were very polite about it. I mean, we had a great relationship, but I was being the like moralistic, uppity policy nerd. And they were like, yeah, you need to like grow up and deal with the reality of the world as it exists. So design a product safety program that does not involve public health officials and does not involve anyone other than a cop who's going to be involved. And so that's how we really ended up with this outcome-driven testing program, right? We couldn't have internal testing because there was some concern that, that would be just too much of the fox guarding the hen house without process oversight, without expertise in the regulatory agency. And so we have these testing programs come about. The testing programs start out, in a pretty binary situation, right? Product is sampled, submitted for testing, it passes or fails. Some programs have some retesting available, but not that much. And I think the first innovation where Willow comes into the space is by saying, hey, we want to define decontamination as a policy option for cannabis businesses. It had kind of been, it wasn't not allowed, but it wasn't really codified in the law at the outset in a way that we really understood what was happening. And so one of the first projects that we really got to work on was really bringing this concept of decontamination into the law. And it started out as largely a post-failure. A business fails a contaminant test and needs to engage in some type of methodology other than extraction to destroy the microbiological contamination that exists on the product.
Exactly. I mean, just like you said, when we started, it was all about, if we fail, we'll call you, we'll utilize your system. And that really allowed us to define, here's what decontamination means. And it was actually drawing a line between decontamination and remediation, because remediation was starting to include remediating into a concentrate, correct?
Yeah, the state defined remediation as specifically taking contaminated flower and extracting it, recognizing that in certain cases, there's at least evidence that shows that the extraction process kills microbial contamination. There's concerns about lingering mycotoxins and things like that in the product. But at the end of the day, that if you have moldy weed and you send it through the liquefier and it comes out as a concentrate, you will kill the mold that is growing on it in the process. And therefore, that is a way to take contaminated raw cannabis and turn it at least into a safe, saleable product. And that was one methodology, and largely the predominant methodology that was being used before Willow, as well as some other companies, came along and said, hey, instead of liquefying it and getting less revenue for your investment, you actually can treat your product and potentially create, and in most cases, successfully create a saleable product as a raw flower.
Right, exactly. And that really was the goal from the beginning, is to provide solutions to cultivators that were dealing with contamination issues, but allowing them to still sell the product as they had originally intended.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the margins that they're getting for saleable shelf flower is much better. I mean, they're getting more per pound than what we now have a classification for, contaminated sent for extraction. There's actually a special, the way Colorado's system works, because we don't have mandatory vertical integration, is there's an average market rate for vertically integrated businesses that are permissively vertically integrated. Some are and some aren't. So they have this average market rate for wholesale tax calculation and different categories of products. So there's, flour and trim. And then over the years, we've added things like whole wet plant and other things. And now there's literally a category contaminated sold for extraction, because that gets a lot less. I think it's like $300 or $400 per pound versus anywhere from $800 to $1,200 a pound, maybe even more, depending on where the market's fluctuating from a wholesale. So these cultivators were looking for a way to treat their product and then have it tested a second time where it would pass the test, and then that would allow them to sell that product as raw flour to consumers.
Exactly.
And I think that this was kind of phase one. And maybe what we want to do is, even this process was complicated, right? Your initial conversations with cultivators was not like, oh yeah, this is great, we want to adopt this technology, right? Initially, there was a lot of, let's say, concern or, arm's length. It was treated as you guys were cleaning up their dirty laundry almost, that they didn't even want to talk about.
Yeah, it was in the beginning. I mean, there was definitely a lot of pushback. There was a lot of, we don't have any issues, not interested in any type of technology to clean our flour. There was a lot of people that said, okay, we've had an issue. We want to use your system to clean this one batch, but we won't have any issues moving forward. And then there was a lot of people who's like, yeah, not interested at all. There's been a ton of pushback. I mean, over the years, that's definitely changing. But in the beginning, I mean, it was really challenging to kind of change that mindset of, we're moving into a very legitimate industry. The industry is moving to legitimacy. And so with that, and with commercial growing, comes a lot of growing pains. And one of those is making sure that product is safe on the back end. And so having those conversations and getting cultivators to understand that, you aren't the only one that are having contamination issues. This is really happening across the board. But what you need to think about is ensuring that you can sell all the product that you produce and that consumers have a very safe product on the back end and moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it almost started out as like, it was a self-judgment. They were like, no, I can grow clean cannabis. I can grow cannabis that doesn't have mold or mildew or other things on it. And it was like they were trying to, either the folks that were having problems weren't talking about it, and they were trying to sweep it under the rug, and there were people cheating the testing program, and there were just all kinds of issues across the board. And maybe it's just important for the entire industry to take a step back and recognize that, like, there are going to be contamination problems. There is mold and mold spores and bacterial spores in the air. That is just going to happen. And when you engage in indoor monoculture, you are definitely going to have concerns. Like this is not, you are not a bad grower if you have, mold and contamination problems. You can do things to reduce it. You can do things to prevent it. But I mean, I can think of a company that we work very closely with that had a brand new facility, built from the ground up. First round of plants put through there. They've been doing this for a decade plus experience. They're a quality company that cares a lot about the product that they put out. And the first round of tests came back and some stuff wasn't passing. And it is not because they weren't skilled cultivators. It's not because they didn't have a clean facility. It's because this is an inevitability. There is a reason that milk is pasteurized. It's not because there are a whole bunch of dirty farmers out there. It's because contamination is an inevitability. It is an outcome that will absolutely occur on a certain percentage of batches, and that the plan to address that is to use technology to mitigate, even if it's technology that's hundreds of years old, to mitigate that kind of concern. And just getting that mind shift from cultivators was a big challenge, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about is we're not here to judge you. We're not here to say you're bad. Like, this is something everyone's going to have to deal with. this is a technology that is now available to you because the goal is to be able to sell what you've cultivated. You know, you have made an investment in this product. It is now an asset of your company. Let's not devalue your asset. Let's invest a little bit of capital into maximizing the value you can get out of that asset.
Exactly. And, looking at other industries, so food and beverage, and modeling what they're doing. And like you said, milk pasteurization's been going on for centuries simply because contamination is inevitable. And when you're dealing with essentially a live raw product, you have to take measures to ensure consumers are safe. And that is exactly what, the impetus was for starting Willow, was ensuring that consumers were safe with end product and providing solutions for cultivators that were faced with inevitable contamination issues.
Exactly. And they need safe, effective solutions, right? That really have to be almost tailored for the cannabis space, because we're talking about a fairly unique product, right? The only real proxy for cannabis is tobacco, and we certainly don't want to mirror tobacco product safety regulations. The tobacco product safety is basically like, the industry's like, well, our stuff's going to kill you, so like you shouldn't bother regulating the product safety of it. And the FDA is, at a very high level, like, okay, we buy that works, right? And we're actually here saying like, this is medicine for sick people who are immunocompromised, and helps the general masses deal with anxiety and thousands of other ailments. So we are trying to be the opposite of that. We want to produce an incredibly safe product for people to consume. And that's where we end up in this kind of complex situation where we need to find new technologies to make sure that we can produce a product that is clean and that is safe for consumers, that does not pulverize it, that does not liquefy it, that does not powderize it, that leaves the potency, the cannabinoids, as well as the terpenes intact. Because if it destroyed terpene content, if it reduced cannabinoid content, it would not really be a viable market solution, and something that's consistent. And so Willow, as well as several other companies and other technologies that have come along, are all trying to kind of bridge this gap between what the cannabis industry started out as, without any kind of decontamination, to a world where we can guarantee that the investment that the company has made in cultivating will yield the price per pound that they're looking for when they're trying to grow shelf quality flower.
Well, and going back to what you said about other methods that couldn't be applicable in cannabis. I mean, for instance, what is used in juices and milk is heat pasteurization. I mean, obviously, we can't use heat pasteurization. UV is suspect as well. HPP, we all know that just destroys flower.
Yeah, I heat pasteurize my cannabis when I smoke it, and I would prefer I prefer that you don't pre-smoke my weed for me.
Yeah, exactly. So, there are very few select technologies that can effectively reduce microbial load and ensure that you're not having a degradation to terpenes and cannabinoid content. So, there's a few technologies that can do it, but these are, the solutions and the innovations that have come through, becoming a legitimate industry.
Once we were able to kind of get the initial phase of this through, where we had cannabis businesses starting to accept the idea that decontamination wasn't some ugly word and it was really kind of an acceptable process, we were still stuck in this post-testing failure world, which is dissimilar to really a lot of other industries, right? We've been talking about milk pasteurization and pasteurization of juices, and you don't even want to know what they do with beef. Beef decontamination is like maybe the most gnarly thing. Like, most people don't realize that most of the beef they've consumed in their life has been like irradiated, where like they drive trucks basically into like a radiation like car wash essentially, and they like zap all the meat in the back of the truck, and like then it goes out for packaging, which just sounds gross, but I guess makes a lot of sense when you think about like slaughterhouses and contamination issues. And so what you have here is we started out with people being really uncomfortable around the idea of decontamination and being concerned about even people knowing that they were decontaminating because nobody should know we have contamination problems, to kind of initial acceptance of, okay, some of my product is going to fail contaminant testing. And when it does, I'm going to call essentially the weed doctor to come in and fix up my sick weed and make it healthy again so it's safe. But that was really never the vision. That was never the goal of where we were trying to get to. It was really a little bit more about being proactive, because that's the experience that you had in juice and in other kind of beverage and food industries.
Exactly. Yes. That was precisely what we had to do. It was all about being proactive to ensure consumer safety.
And so this summer, we worked on a policy change with the Marijuana Enforcement Division, where now cannabis businesses in Colorado have the ability to transfer cannabis to another cultivator or manufacturer that potentially has decontamination equipment, either centralized processing facilities like Willow has in California, or other companies, because small mom and pop growers and smaller facilities, this stuff is expensive. We recognize that. It's not cheap. It's not crazy expensive, and it's good value. But at the end of the day, not everybody can afford to put one of these machines. And so what we tried to do was get the regulations to codify pre-testing decontamination. And we did that through allowing transfers, and kind of now have in the law this idea that if you're a grower and you want to transfer product to have it decontaminated, you can. And that was a big thing, because initially you weren't allowed to transfer it. And this is true in most states. You're not allowed to transfer product prior to testing. And if that's the case, then the concept of, these centralized decontamination facilities that Willow has been starting, it doesn't work, right? We don't want to treat product after it fails a test. We want to proactively treat 100% of product so that we know it's going to pass the first time, and guarantee that, whatever it is. Because the other thing that's come up, and maybe we could dive into a little bit of this speciation testing and some of these other things as we kind of, the testing programs evolve. But I want to talk a little bit about this idea of a kill step and how that works in other industries. So, from your juicing business, everything had to go through a kill step. We've mentioned that before. What exactly is a kill step?
So a kill step is the last step in your HACCP plan, which is your hazards analysis critical control point, that ensures that it's gone through a process to kill, eliminate, destroy any type of pathogenic pathogen. So E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria, that was what we were focused on with the juice business. Of course, cannabis has added total yeast and mold, bacteria, coliforms, and then some more speciation testing. So with the juice company is all of the juices would be bottled, labeled, ready to go, essentially looking like they were to be sold. They would be then shipped to a central processing facility that would treat them in the HPP machine. And once they were done treated, then they were safe to be shipped and distributed to grocery stores, wherever the point of sale was. So once it had gone through that process, after having gone through the entire validation study, that the product is safe, that there are no remaining pathogens within the consumable beverage. And so really that was, I've been standing on the soapbox for a few years now and saying, like, this is what we need to do in cannabis. We need to implement kill steps. So there's one step at the last stage of the production process to ensure that, yes, the consumer is safe. And, what does that look like in the future? Does it look like, we don't have to do batch testing, that if you implement this type of step, then, you're ensuring consumer safety and saying to the regulatory agencies, listen, I've taken extra steps and insurances that this product is safe for consumption.
And I think that this is like a paradigm shifting policy conversation, right? All product safety in cannabis, or I don't want to say all, the vast, vast majority of product safety in cannabis from a regulatory perspective is this post-process third-party government mandated testing. it is not a proactive process review where we're going to say, okay, what are you doing in each step along the way? How are you making sure you're trying to mitigate risk for contamination throughout the entire production process? And then at the very end, what is your kill step? What are you doing to make sure that if there was a breakdown along the way in process, that you have the backstop of a kill step? And that turns everything that we're doing on its head, right? Instead of saying, okay, we're going to let the business do whatever they want in their processes. No one's going to take a look at it. No one's going to pay attention to it. We're just going to come at the very end of the situation, and we are going to then test your product to make sure that, one, your potency is accurately being labeled, and two, it is free from contaminants that are, the buzzwords are usually injurious to human health. And that's a huge problem because at the end of the day, there is no way to test every single batch of cannabis for anything that could be on there that is injurious to human health. There is no way to construct a government-mandated third-party testing program that is comprehensive enough to cover all the potential pathogens that could be there. Which is why no other consumer products are managed this way, right? What we want to do is say, okay, hold on, we need to take a pause here. We talk to people in the Colorado industry. I have friends in all over the country. They're spending millions of dollars a year on testing costs, and we're still getting leakage in the system, right? Whether that's post-testing contaminant growth for products that are not packaged, or maybe it had enough mold, not enough mold that it would fail testing, but mold grows over time. And so that sits in the jar for, 6 months or 3 months in the back storage. And by the time it gets sold to a consumer, it does have high elevated levels of total yeast and mold. And when you're testing for total yeast and mold, one of the things that came up on a call more recently that I was on in the Marijuana Science and Policy Work Group in Colorado is that right now, a lot of states have this number of 10,000 colony forming units. If it's above that, it fails. If it's below that, it's safe. But if you have a particularly gnarly mold and there's only 100 colony forming units and you inhale that into your lungs, that could be very dangerous. So we have this kind of really expensive, costly program that isn't how we do other things and isn't how we manage products because it is inefficient. It's poorly targeted. And so the solution to this is, instead of subjecting cannabis on a batch level to a battery of expensive tests, instead we should be creating processes to make sure that we can just say, no, as long as you ran it through the kill step and had good handling and packaging practices to prevent whatever minor amounts of bacteria or total yeast and mold that could remain, because the vast majority of it's killed. But in case there's just a little bit extra, you have good handling practices and good packaging practices, you should know that it's safe. Just like in the juice business. Once it went through the pasteurization process, we didn't need to test that juice to sell to consumers. We knew from our process that it was safe. And we want to be able to transition cannabis into that, because the other part is that's what the FDA is going to expect. When federal prohibition ends, the FDA is going to expect this kind of process oversight. They're going to expect HACCP plans. They're not going to be okay with this kind of ill-fitting, well, it's the best we got for now testing program.
I totally agree with you. They are absolutely not going to be okay with, a testing program that's, a batch here, maybe a batch there. There's some loopholes to get around potentially testing and getting accurate results. They're going to say everything needs to be, quote unquote, treated or have gone through some sort of step so that we feel confident that this is safe for any type of consumer. And they're going to expect this very quickly. I mean, when they come in, they're going to implement these types of rules similar to food and beverage. And it's not going to be like, well, you have, 6 months to a year to get this together. No, it's going to be very quick. The expectations are that you're already doing something like this. So again, back to your comment about being proactive. I mean, that is the best we can do as an industry, is to be proactive about implementing steps and processes that ultimately the FDA is going to say, okay, this is exactly, how we regulate food and beverage. And this is how we're going to implement those types of rules into cannabis.
And this isn't to say that there won't be testing. There will be testing. We firmly believe in testing. At our firm, Willow believes in testing. It is more about what's driving the testing. Are businesses driving the testing to check up on their processes, to develop new processes as they grow and expand and new technologies come to the market? Or are they batch testing everything the way they are now? And it's really about shifting the product safety burden to looking at the process that a business is using and then being proactive about addressing potential risk associated with contamination as opposed to being reactive. And right now, the businesses, I mean, this is not, they're essentially forced by regulatory structures to be reactive. If you're spending millions of dollars just to comply with the testing program, it's very hard to then also proactively treat every single batch of cannabis with decontamination. There's only so much revenue that comes in per pound. There's cost of production. There are economic limits to some of this. And so I know some companies do proactively treat every single batch, but it's typically larger scale companies because they're the ones that can afford at that economy of scale to squeeze in decontamination equipment and time and process in. And what we need to do is alleviate some of that testing burden and essentially shift some of the resources being devoted to testing to process, to having quality processes to address HACCP plans and ensure that there's a kill step up front for cannabis. And over time, we expect to see the regulations hopefully transition into that direction.
Well, and to go back to your point about the testing, I think when this was implemented and states were saying, okay, we're going to set these thresholds, they were essentially doing the best they could with very, very little knowledge. I mean, there's been no historical knowledge on how to test this type of product. What is the correct threshold? I know that's been a cause of concern for many years. And cultivators, some believe that a 10,000, 1,000, 100,000 CFUs, it kind of, it's different across the board. But that, the regulators were essentially implementing and paving the road for what the testing program was to look like. And so, I think what they did in the beginning was their intentions were pure in that they were ensuring that consumer safety was taken care of and at the focus of the legalization of this industry. But again, the goal is for cultivators to preventatively treat. There's a lot of technology that's out there now that can be implemented that I think is price conscious for treating every batch. But again, as we start to scale, I think we'll see more implementation of that.
As the decontamination industry starts to scale, you'll see prices go down, of course. As the cultivation industry continues to scale and greater economies of scale will be met, it'll be easier to absorb the kind of traditional process oversight that you would see in other consumer good industries. And so, we are in the middle in the Marijuana Science and Policy Work Group on the testing subcommittee. Both Jill and I are members of this subcommittee. We are actively discussing this issue. We're actively discussing total yeast and mold testing is kind of the mandate from the government. We're talking about aerosol testing and shelf stability testing and a variety of other kind of tests that we want to have discussed and considered and structure of tests. But one of the major issues is kind of total yeast and mold testing. Pretty much every state, not every single state, but pretty much every state requires cannabis to be tested for the total colony forming units of yeast and mold. And there are several methodologies that can be used to achieve that test result. But at the end of the day, it's become pretty uniform. And while there is some variation, as Jill mentioned, somewhere, 100,000 colony forming units, some 10,000 colony forming units, some 1,000. Most states have settled around that 10,000 number. And we're questioning, is that number the right number? Is this test the right test? And there's some very interesting information that's come out about how, when people have reported respiratory ailments in the past to the public health department and they have admitted that they're cannabis consumers and they test the cannabis, there has been a correlation between cannabis that is tested high for total yeast and mold and respiratory illness. we don't know if it's causation, but we know that there's certainly some risk there. And so what we want to do is make sure, again, that our industry is not making people sick, that we're able to produce a safe and clean product. And instead of focusing on arguing about what mold species we should be testing for and how many and what the levels should be, because we honestly don't know, the more simple solution is to just require a kill step, is just to kill everything up front. And then we don't have to worry as much about it. And getting to the point where the industry can shift their resources to making sure they have safe processes as opposed to passing this test, this gatekeeper test that we have, I think is going to go a long way to helping cultivators avoid losing out on the profits that they need to keep their business model going and to keep their business sustainable and continue paying their employees, while also ensure giving greater assurancy that consumers at the end of the day are receiving a safe product, because that is first and foremost the number one priority is safe cannabis, which is what we've been talking about this whole time, which is safe cannabis is clean cannabis. Clean cannabis is safe cannabis.
Well said. Well said, Jordan. I think ultimately, it boils down to we're all consumers. And when, if you're a cultivator and whether or not you believe in this testing limit or whether or not you believe in kill steps, when you go out and you purchase cannabis or you purchase any type of product that's consumable, you want to know that you're safe. Unless you're a raw enthusiast, I'm pretty sure that you want to feel confident that your milk isn't filled with E. coli. And so it's not, because it goes through a pasteurization step. And I think cannabis consumers also want to feel confident that their flower isn't moldy or does not contain any sort of pathogenic species that could be damaging to their health. So, think of it as we're all consumers. And again, we want clean, safe weed.
And it may take us some time to get there from a regulatory perspective. It may take us some time to get there from an operational and business perspective. And I think everybody that we work on from a policy perspective, whether they're clients like Willow or regulators and things like that, recognize that this isn't some flip a switch moment. But that if we are able to navigate this transition, there's going to be a variety of benefits. First and foremost, consumers will be more confident that they are having a clean product, because at the end of the day, you cannot, if you tested every gram of cannabis, you would have no cannabis left to sell. So there is untested cannabis on the market. In fact, every piece of cannabis on the market is technically untested, because the testing process would destroy the cannabis itself. So every bit of cannabis that you've ever bought in your entire life hasn't been tested. Other samples from that batch have been tested, but the safest way to ensure safe product is just to ensure every gram is treated in some way that it is decontaminated so that we know it is safe. Secondly, this is going to be more efficient for regulators and policymakers, because the testing program is a really complex burden on regulators that they have to manage and oversee and ensure compliance with. And then third, and importantly as well, this will be more efficient for cultivators. They have to worry less about contaminants on the market. They will spend less on testing and more on, process and upfront costs. But I think at the end of the day, they will find that this outcome is actually more cost efficient than the current system. And so if we are able to make regulators' jobs easier, make process and development and cultivating costs more efficient and less costly for cultivators, while providing a safer product for consumers, at the end of the day, policy will get there. And most importantly, this is likely what's going to be required under federal legalization. So the faster we can get our industry towards this place, the easier the transition from federal prohibition to federal regulation will be across the board. And that is what we want most of all, is at least for me personally, I want as many of our OG cannabis businesses that survived the complexities of federal prohibition, that were with us from the start, to survive that transition into a federally regulated industry. And the best way to do that is to get everyone up and running beforehand, so that it is not a massive burden shift for them when this happens. Agreed.
Agree on all fronts. We got to be proactive and get these processes implemented before all of the very strong, heavy-handed regulations come down. And I think, to your point, saving money on testing costs is, I think, a huge motivator, right?
I would hope so. I would hope so. I mean, maybe not for the labs, but I mean, again, like there is a world for testing labs in this space. There will be cannabis testing labs. The vast majority of businesses are not going to be able to perform in-house tests. There will be ongoing testing to make sure that processes aren't failing down and new developments and changes and things like that. It's just a matter of, what's driving that testing. Is it this government kind of program, or is it real risk-based assessments on product safety experts? And so we're going to continue keeping an eye on this issue. We're going to continue monitoring it and talking about it here on the Weed Wonks over time. And in the interim, I'm going to continue going to these meetings every other week for the testing subcommittee for the Colorado's marijuana science and policy work group, which is one of the more fun things I get to do with my job these days, is participate in these super nerdy calls. So we're going to continue talking about it and continue working on making sure the best cannabis policy is adopted in every state across the board, as well as bringing technology through, supporting companies like Willow to bear so that cannabis cultivators can more efficiently run their business. And so, Jill, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Weed Wonks today. We really appreciate the work that you're doing to help cultivators bring safe and clean product to market, as well as all the fun, nerdy conversations that we get to have and the jokes about weed powder that will never end and we will make forever. And so outside of that, I look forward to following up, and I'm sure I'll talk to you soon. I guess the other full disclosure is our kids play together sometimes. So we've been doing some Zoom play dates out there for all the parents out there in quarantine land. Zoom play dates are a thing. They don't really work all that well, but it's at least a semblance of sanity that we've brought to our lives. So I'm sure I will talk to you soon. But thank you so much for making time today and joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
All right. Well, everybody stay safe and stay nerdy. All right, Shay, make the magic.